You've got an important event coming up, a presentation, a trip, an interview, or just an intense conversation. You look at your calendar and think, great, I've got time to get things done around the event. So you start scheduling things on either side because you can be extra productive that way. But then those days come and you're mentally foggy, distracted, and unproductive. The event happens, maybe it even goes well, but after, you still can't focus. Another few days slip past. By the end of the week, you're wondering what on earth has happened and blaming yourself. This is the trap of peak emotional events, and this is what we're going to talk about today. They don't just cost you the day, they hijack your energy before and after the events. And if you're ambitious and have some really big goals, this is the perfect way to sabotage yourself. So by the end of this video, you'll know why you lose focus even when your calendar says you shouldn't, the hidden patterns behind your burnout, and how to plan around these invisible drains so your energy matches your ambition. So if you're ambitious and driven, you usually pack your calendar full of productive events. Yet each month you end up exhausted, many tasks incomplete or done below standard, and you feel guilty. This is the trap, and it's something I experienced many times. Now this is me when I was working full time, and I would constantly pack my calendar trying to be efficient and productive because I was trying to build a side business. That was when this problem really showed itself. I was trying to do lots and lots of projects at the same time. There was no slack in the system at all. It would then eventually just snap and I'd just completely break down. And it's extremely common amongst a lot of high performers I've worked with. And here's a quick picture of them. Okay, so what is a peak emotional event? We're going to explain it here on this next slide. So what you can see here is when you have a peak emotional event, like a job interview, presentation, or you go on vacation, or you've got a major deadline, it will happen at this point, but we can track your emotional drain here. I like to show it like a curve over here, which increases as you get closer to the event. And at some point, it starts to affect your daily life. When you have the peak emotional event, which happens at this particular point here, it affects you potentially well before and after. So if we map this to a calendar, it looks like this. You've got your job interview on the Wednesday, but you have these affected days on either side. All peak emotional events have a variation of this curve, some wider and some narrower, and it will vary depending on who you are and how big the event is for you. But the thing you want to know is what is the effect on your focus, because you're trying to be productive and you're probably struggling with this right now. We can look at this chart. If you're trying to focus, this is the level of focus needed for you to be productive, right? We'll just take an arbitrary kind of level here. What we can see is as we go along, as we approach the peak emotional event, your focus starts to dip. And at some point, it keeps dipping as you get closer and closer. And then it breaches this threshold, what I call the functional threshold of your focus. And once it drops below it, you're just pretty useless, right? So you can't do any task here. Now you can map this to any different type of task. If you're doing a very admin-y, quite easy task, then the amount of focus you need might be really small. So then it will come down here. But if you're ambitious and working on these really big goals that require lots of creative energy for you, and maybe you're trying to start a new business or you're trying to change career or something like that, these are things that require a lot of focus. So you're more likely to be up here. Adding to that, some people can get more affected than others. You might start being extra sensitive to it as you're approaching the event. And this is me. So as I approach an event, I start getting quite anxious and stressed about the event. And this is what happens to me. So if the event is happening on a Wednesday, I might be affected from Saturday, all the way to the next weekend. And this is what happens to my level of focus. So I usually match this kind of pattern. Now, what we want to understand is what is the length of time that your focus is affected for, because this is the crucial bit. Anything below this, if you're working, like I said, if you're working on something extremely important, this focus level is likely to be quite high. So this is going to be quite damaging potentially. It's often significantly longer than the event, right? So the event's happening here. We intuitively know this happens, but sometimes we don't realize the effect. We don't realize the effect of the event. And I noticed this particularly when I was working on starting my own business, because a level of focus I needed to work on something I had no idea about how to do was extremely high. So I would get affected for days. So what happens when you have multiple peak emotional events? Because obviously we were just looking at a scenario where you only have one. Let's look at it. You have this peak emotional event. You have another one here, another one here, another one here. What do you think this is going to do to your level of focus? Right? It just looks like a mess. You'll have something like this. Now, this was my life for a few years where I just was struggling I had loads of things happening and I was trying to work on some projects and I just couldn't get them. I just couldn't work on them because my head was all over the place. Your focus can be left below the useful threshold for a very long time. Mapping this to your calendar, you won't see it, right? You will only look at the peak. You will put you will enter in your calendar the peak emotional event. You often won't put in these affected days. And this is where I went wrong. Most people I see are often running at capacity. So by the time I work with people, they're already trying to work on side projects or trying to build a side business. So they're already they've got very little slack or headroom in their brain. Peak emotional events start to stack, as they always do. That's what life does to us. It's a burnout waiting to happen because you're at 100%. It's like an engine running at the red line. It's like an engine that's already running extremely hot, and then you push it even further, and then it eventually overheats and breaks. This is a version of a strategic sabotage, right? And you don't want to do that. It's something I did a lot. Your creative window completely vanishes. So if you're working on something that requires your creativity or your focus, it's going to be extremely difficult if you're doing something like this. Now, I didn't notice this until I started working on really difficult things, well, at least things that I found difficult. When you get to this point, you will lose your momentum. So if you've been building up your momentum over the last few weeks and then this peak emotional events thing happens, it can ruin you. The worst part is, on paper, your calendar still looks fine, right? Because you only got a few of throughout peak emotional events throughout your month. Now, some people I've worked with, they've had loads of events. And I'm thinking that there's no way they're going to get through that. And at this point, you usually tell yourself you should have even done more. This is where the guilt sets in. You had the hours, right? But you didn't have the capacity. And no one tells you the capacity isn't just time, right? These slots in your calendar. It's energy, emotional space, and your cognitive availability. So what is the consequence? Well, you're likely to feel extremely overwhelmed, have an insane inability to focus, and you'll just feel foggy all the time, and you'll be exhausted, probably stressed and extremely anxious. So what can you do about this? There's a 5-step process I like to follow, and I've taken quite a few people through this. The first one is scan, 2 is estimate, 3 is block, 4 is balance, and 5 is adjust. And we'll go through them sequentially now. So scanning. The first thing to do is to start scanning your upcoming events. You want to review the events you're signing up for. This is an easy error to make quite early, because if you're someone like me and you're a bit of a yes person, you would say yes to opportunities and events quite frequently. And the further in the future they are, the quicker you are to say yes, not realizing what the emotional effect is likely to be and how disruptive it could be. I'd only end up regretting this later when it's really difficult to get out of those things, right? You want to scan this. If you're the kind of person where you start loading your calendar up really early, be careful. Number 2, estimate. So this is where you want to start doing some work on yourself, really, but in a practical manner. You want to review historic events like the events that you're planning, and assess the run up and run down for each of these event types. How many days do you take before the event where you can't really focus? What is the run up? And how many days do you need to relax and recharge after the event? Write down and assess the total time. If it's a Wednesday, maybe it's a day and a half, or even 2 or 3 days before, and maybe a couple of days after. Now, you want to build a bit of a library about this. So I used to write in a spreadsheet all the different types of events, and it would be quite humbling, because I realize when I face and confront these events, I realize I want to believe that I can focus on other things all the way up until the event. I'll do my preparation, but then I can just get on with it and I can just switch. And then after it, I can have a little bit of time off and then get on with things pretty quickly. The reality, when I look at my historic events, is that I needed a lot more time of recovery before I could actually get on with things. That was in conflict with my desire to be extremely productive, but I didn't notice this until I actually started to plot it out. So I made a whole bunch of templates and spreadsheets for this because I became a bit obsessed about this, because it was affecting my ability to do good work so much. Yeah, so I'd really recommend putting something together, at least writing these down. The reflection exercise will be extremely useful because it will just make you remember all of these different instances. And what I had is you will eventually have a list of all these different types of events, so you won't even need to think about it, because when the event comes up in the future, you'll just remember, oh, wait a minute. If I sign up for that event, I'll need a good 2 or 3 days on either side. So you can respond a bit quicker, which we'll come on to in a bit. And then cross-check this with those new events. So remember, run up and run down. Okay, next is block. This is the hard one. This is one that I have to work very hard with clients and have to strategize with them. Now you can start mapping your calendar and block times out. You've got the event happening here, event here, event here, and event here. You want to have these block out periods. So you can start to see, even though you only had a few events here, the effects, the runoff, the run up and the run down periods, they're really long. Your calendar will feel very different to how it was. You have a lot less white space in between it. Now, obviously, this is actually not that many events. Some people will have a lot of events. And they could be, it could be filled with work deadlines, social events, personal events, anything like that. You may have to block out multiple days if necessary. If you start with this, it becomes a little bit easier because you've got something to refer to. And then you need to work on setting these boundaries, especially with other people, because opportunities usually come through the external world bringing it to you. And that could be your boss, it could be friends, it could be family. You need to protect your time here. It's extremely important. And you will need to learn how to say no in these periods. But with the new calendar, it will be a little bit easier, because if you have a little bit of blank space, it will look like you've got lots of time, but now it looks like you have a lot less. Preempt reasons if necessary. Oh, it's written behind here. Yep, so preempt reasons if necessary. So you can't quite see that yet. The idea here is, for some people, I work with lots of people pleasers, and especially having been one myself, I needed to come up with lots of reasons to make myself feel comfortable to push back. Now, you don't actually need lots of deep reasons, but if it makes you feel better, craft them first. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. There was one time, luckily, I was practicing this, and my boss, years ago in my corporate job, he was asking if I could go to an event or something like that, and he asked me, "Oh, are you free?" And for some reason, I had my calendar up, and he was quite pushy, and he wanted to, and he was really pressing against boundaries. Luckily, I actually had set up my calendar to do this, so I just blocked out loads and loads of extra days for something, and I clicked on my calendar, and he saw it, and I was so happy that I'd actually blocked it out, and he could see that I had this thing on. It was only for one day, but I blocked it out for about 5 days. It was actually my peak emotional event calendar, which he didn't quite see the title. So that was pretty handy. The next one is balance. This is all about starting to get a little bit more efficient with this. So what I call task load balancing. This is where we can start thinking, first thing to focus on is we want you to rest where you need to. So you want to have the healthy white spaces in between, so you're not always really, really up against it. Then you can start putting in easier tasks with the heavier tasks. And then you can review as necessary. This was crucial for me when I was trying to manage running a side business while I was working full time. I would figure out how to stack all of these so I could get lots of stuff done without getting completely burnt out. Then adjust using your experiential feedback. Review your previous weeks. Where did you burn out? Over time, as awareness increases, you can become a productivity machine, but in a really compassionate way. So this is what I like to think of as compassionate productivity, where you're doing an assessment, but it's being very practical, and it maps to your real life, and it takes into account your emotions. And that's only if you want to become a productivity machine. It's just that that's the kind of person I generally work with. And we want this system to be rapid and live adjustments. So if anything comes into your calendar, you can quickly move things around to make sure that your mind is always in a healthy state. So this is not a knowledge activity. This must be practice. You have to turn this into a regular practice every week. So I would constantly set up these calendars, and I've helped lots of clients do this as well. Regularly track and log your peak emotional events. I have a whole system and templates for all of this. So, but you don't need anything fancy. You can just journal this, write stuff down, track your run up and run down effects. Now, if you haven't really thought about this, just do it the first time round until it becomes intuitive. Then you'll know, okay, when I go away for the weekend to see family or friends, I need a day recovery on either side, right? It's as simple as that. But you just want to have these like little packages so you always remember it. Experiment with placing your high focused kind of white space windows in places and see how much output comes out of you, and see what happens when you move a focus window really close to a peak emotional event. See how much it drops. Just test it for yourself. Use systems and rules to protect your energy and boundaries. This is extremely important. So I would actually write a whole cheat sheet for certain clients. So they would have exact phrases and scripts to use against people that they regularly deal with who always press against their boundaries. Because we don't want to be thinking about that when people ask us. We want to just have something that is extremely well rehearsed, because it can be quite easy to just go along with something if you're not used to it. So this is what allowed me to take on side businesses while working full-time without that full overwhelming burnout. It allowed me to juggle multiple projects and also work on lots of hobbies at the same time. It also allowed me to grow all my social media channels simultaneously while building out the business when I moved over to that later. So next time you wonder why you're exhausted when your calendar looks empty, remember, it's probably not empty at all. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. And for those of you who are still here, I've got a course coming out soon on mental resilience, and it will contain all of my drills, practices, and templates for this. There'll be lots of guided exercises and drills here to help you build and implement systems for you to run yourself, or all the cheat sheets. Yeah, this is actually a slide from the actual module within the course. So yes, look out for that soon. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.